Little Tailor by the Brothers Grimm. One summer morning a little tailor was sitting on his table near the window. He was in high good humor and sewed with all his might. A peasant woman came down the street calling out, "Good jam, cheap! Good jam, cheap!" That sounded sweet to the tailor's ears. He stuck his shapely little head out of the window and cried, "Up here, good woman! You'll find a buyer." The woman hauled her heavy baskets up the 3 flights of stairs to the tailor's, and he made her unpack every single pot. He examined them all, lifted them up, sniffed at them, and finally said, "This looks like good jam to me. Weigh me out 3 ounces, my good woman, and if it comes to a quarter of a pound, you won't find me complaining." The woman, who had hoped to make a good sale, gave him what he asked for and went away grumbling and very much out of sorts. "God bless this jam and give me health and strength," cried the little tailor. Whereupon he took bread from the cupboard, cut a slice straight across the loaf, and spread it with jam. "I bet this won't taste bitter," he said, "but before biting into it, I'm going to finish my jacket." He put the bread down beside him and went on with his sewing, taking bigger and bigger stitches in his joy. Meanwhile, the flies that had been sitting on the wall, enticed by the sweet smell, came swarming down on the jam. "Hey, who invited you?" cried the little tailor, and shooed the unbidden guests away. But the flies, who didn't understand his language, refused to be dismissed and kept coming in greater and greater numbers. Finally, at the end of his patience, the tailor took a rag from the catch-all underneath his table. "Just wait, I'll show you," he cried, and struck out at them unmercifully. When he stopped and counted, no less than 7 flies lay dead with their legs in the air. He couldn't help admiring his bravery. "What a man I am!" he cried. "The whole town must hear of this." And 1, 2, 3, he cut a belt for himself, stitched it up, and embroidered on it big letters, "7 at one blow." Then he said, "Down my foot, the whole world must hear of it." And for joy his heart wagged like a lamb's tail. The tailor put on his belt and decided to go out into the world, for clearly his shop was too small for such valor. Before leaving, he ransacked the house for something to take with him, but all he could find was an old cheese. So he put that in his pocket. Just outside the door, he caught sight of a bird that had got itself caught in the bushes, and the bird joined the cheese in his pocket. Ever so bravely he took to the road, and because he was light and nimble, he never seemed to get tired. Up into the mountains he went, and when he reached the highest peak, he found an enormous giant sitting and taking it easy and enjoying the view. The little tailor went right up to him. He wasn't the least bit afraid. "Greetings, friend," he said, looking out at the great world. "Are you? Well, that's just where I'm headed for, to try my luck. Would you care to go with me?" The giant looked at the tailor contemptuously and said, "You little pipsqueak! You miserable nobody!" "Is that so?" said the little tailor, unbuttoning his coat and showing the giant his belt. "Read that. That'll show you what kind of man I am." When he had read what was written, 7 at one blow, the giant thought somewhat better of the little man. All the same, he decided to put him to the test. So he picked up a stone and squeezed it until drops of water appeared. "Do that," he said, "if you've got the strength." "That," said the little tailor, "why, that's child's play for a man like me." Whereupon he reached into his pocket, took out the soft cheese, and squeezed it until the whey ran out. What do you think of that? The giant didn't know what to say. He couldn't believe the little man was so strong. So he picked up a stone and threw it so high that the eye could hardly keep up with it. "All right, you little runt. Let's see you do that." "Nice throw," said the tailor, "but it fell to the ground in the end. Watch me throw one that won't ever come back." Whereupon he reached into his pocket, took out the bird, and tossed it into the air. Glad to be free, the bird flew up and away and didn't come back. "Well," said the tailor, "what do you think of that?" "I've got to admit you can throw," said the giant, "but let's see what you can carry." Pointing at a big oak tree that had fell to the ground, he said, "If you're strong enough, help me carry this tree out of the forest." "Glad to," said the little man. "You take the trunk over your shoulder and I'll carry the branches. They're the heaviest part." The giant took the trunk over his shoulder, and Tailor sat down on a branch so that the giant, who couldn't look around, had to carry the whole tree and the tailor to boot. The tailor felt so chipper in his comfortable back seat that he began to whistle Three Tailors Went A-Riding, as though hauling trees were child's play to a man of his strength. After carrying the heavy load for quite some distance, the giant was exhausted. "Hey!" he cried out, "I've got to drop it." The tailor jumped nimbly down, put his arms around the tree as if he had been carrying it, and said to the giant, "I wouldn't have thought a tiny tree would be too much for a big man like you." They went on together until they came to a cherry tree. The giant grabbed the crown where the cherries ripened soonest, pulled it down, handed it to the tailor, and bade him eat. But the tailor was much too light to hold the tree down. When the giant let go, the crowd snapped back and the tailor was whisked high into the air. When he had fallen to the ground without hurting himself, the giant cried out, "What's the matter? You mean you're not strong enough to hold that bit of a sapling?" "Not strong enough? How can you say such a thing about a man who did for seven at one blow? I jumped over the tree because the hunters down there were shooting in the thicket. Now you try, see if you can do it." The giant tried, but he couldn't get over the tree and got stuck in the upper branches. Once again, the little tailor had won out. "All right," said the giant. "If you're so brave, let me take you to our cave to spend the night with us." The little tailor was willing, and went along with him. When they got to the cave, the other giants were sitting around the fire. Each one was holding a roasted sheep in his hands and eating it. The little tailor looked around and thought, "This place is a good deal roomier than my workshop." The giant showed him a bed and told him to lie down and sleep, but the bed was too big for the little tailor, so instead of getting into it, he crept into a corner. At midnight, when the giant thought the tailor must be sound asleep, he got up, took a big iron bar, and split the bed in two with one stroke. "That will settle the little run's hash," he thought. At the crack of dawn, the giants started into the forest. They had forgotten all about the little tailor. All at once he came striding along as chipper and bold as you please. The giants were terrified. They thought he was a ghost and would kill them all, and ran away as fast as their legs would carry them. The little tailor went his way. After following his nose for many days, he came to the grounds of a king's palace. Feeling tired, he lay down in the grass and went to sleep, and while he was sleeping, some courtiers came along. They examined him from all sides and read the inscription on his belt, "Seven at one blow." "Goodness," they said, "what can a great war hero like this be doing here in peacetime? He must be some great lord." They went in and told the king. "If war should break out," they said, "a man like that would come in very handy. Don't let him leave on any account." This struck the king as good advice, and he sent one of his courtiers to offer the tailor a post in his army. The courtier went back to the sleeper, waited until he stretched his limbs and opened his eyes, and made his offer. "That's just what I came here for," said the tailor. "I'll be glad to enter the king's service." So he was received with honor and given apartments of his own. But the soldiers who were assigned to the little tailor wished him 1,000 miles away. "What will become of us?" they asked. "If we quarrel with him and he strikes, 7 of us will fall at one blow. We won't last long at that rate." So they took counsel together and went to the king and asked to be released from his service. The king was sad to be losing all his faithful servants because of one, and wished he'd never laid eyes on the little tailor. He'd have been glad to get rid of him, but he didn't dare dismiss him for fear the great hero might strike him and all his people dead and seize the throne for himself. The king thought, and at last he hit on an idea. He sent word to the little tailor that since he was such a great hero, he wanted to make him an offer. There were 2 giants living in a certain forest, and they were murdering and looting and burning and laying the country waste. No one dared go near them for fear for his life. If the hero could conquer and kill these 2 giants, the king would give him his only daughter to wife, with half of his kingdom as her dowry. And moreover, the king would send 100 knights to back him up. Sounds like just the thing for me, thought the little tailor. It's not every day that somebody offers you a beautiful princess and half a kingdom. It's a deal, the tailor replied to the king. I'll take care of those giants, and I won't need the 100 knights. You can't expect a man who does for 7 at one blow to be afraid of 2. The little tailor started out with 100 knights at his heels. When they got to the edge of the forest, he said to his companions, "Stay here. I'll attend to the giants by myself." Then he bounded into the woods, peering to the right and to the left. After a while, he caught sight of the 2 giants who were lying under a tree asleep, snoring so hard that the branches rose and fell. Quick as a flash, the little tailor picked up stones, filled both his pockets with them, and climbed the tree. Halfway up, he slid along a branch until he was right over the sleeping giants. Then he picked out one of the giants and dropped stone after stone on his chest. For a long while, the giants didn't notice, but in the end, he woke up, gave his companion a poke, and said, "Why are you hitting me?" "You're dreaming," said the other. "I'm not hitting you." When he had lain down to sleep again, the tailor dropped a stone on the second giant. "What is this?" he cried. "Why are you pelting me?" "Well, I'm not pelting you," the first grumbled. They argued a while, but they were too tired to keep it up, and finally their eyes closed again. Then the little tailor took his biggest stone and threw it with all his might at the first giant's chest. "This is too much!" cried the giant, and jumping up like a madman, he pushed his companion so hard against a tree that it shook, and the other repaid him in kind, and they both flew into such a rage that they started pulling up trees and belaboring each other until they both lay dead on the ground. The little tailor jumped down. "Lucky they didn't pull up the tree I was sitting in," he said to himself. "I'd have had to jump into another like a squirrel, but then we tailors are quick." He drew his sword, gave them both good thrusts in the chest, and went back to the knights. "The job is done," he said. "I've settled their hash, but it was a hard fight. They were so desperate they pulled up trees to fight with, but how could that help them against a man who does for 7 at one blow?" "Aren't you even wounded?" the knights asked. "I should say not," said the tailor. "Not so much as a scratch." The knights wouldn't believe him, so they rode into the forest where they found the giants lying in pools of blood with uprooted trees all around them. The little tailor went to the king and demanded the promised reward, but the king regretted his promise and thought up another way to get rid of the hero. "Before I give you my daughter and half my kingdom," he said, "you will have to perform one more task. There's a unicorn loose in the forest and he's doing a good deal of damage. You will have to catch him first." "If the 2 giants didn't scare me, why would I worry about a unicorn? 7 at one blow is my meat." Taking a rope and an axe, he went into the forest and again told the knights who had been sent with him to wait on the fringe. He didn't have to look long. In a short while, the unicorn came along and rushed at the tailor, meaning to run him through with his horn. "Not so fast," said the tailor. "It's not as easy as all that." The tailor stood still and waited until the unicorn was quite near him, and then jumped nimbly behind a tree. The unicorn charged full force and rammed into the tree. His horn went in and struck so fast that he hadn't the strength to pull it out. He was caught. "I've got him," said the tailor. He came out from behind his tree, put the rope around the unicorn's neck, and taking his axe, chopped the wood away from the horn. When that was done, he led the beast to the king. But the king was still unwilling to grant him the promised reward, and made a third demand. Before the wedding, he wanted the tailor to capture a wild boar which had been ravaging the forest, and the royal huntsman would help him. "Gladly," said the little tailor. "It's child's play." He didn't take the huntsman into the forest with him, and they were just as pleased, for several times the boar had given them such a reception that they had no desire to seek him out. When the boar caught sight of the tailor, he gnashed his teeth, foamed at the mouth, and made a dash at him, and would have laid him out flat if the nimble hero hadn't escaped into a nearby chapel. The boar ran in after him, but the tailor jumped out of the window, ran around the chapel, and slammed the door. The infuriated beast was much too heavy and clumsy to jump out of the window, so he was caught. The little tailor ran back to the huntsmen and told them to go and see the captive with their own eyes. The tailor himself went to the king, who had to keep his promise this time, like it or not, and give his daughter and half the kingdom to the tailor. If the king had known that far from being a war hero, the bridegroom was only a little tailor, he would have been even unhappier than he was. And so the wedding was celebrated with great splendor and little joy, and the tailor became a king. One night, the young queen heard her husband talking in his sleep. "Boy," he said, "hurry up with that jerkin you're making and get those breeches mended, or I'll break my yardstick over your head." Then she knew how he had got his start in life. Next morning she went to her father, told him her tale of woe, and begged him to help her get rid of a husband who had turned out to be a common tailor. The king bade her take comfort and said, "Leave the door of your bedroom unlocked tonight. My servants will be waiting outside. Once he's asleep, they'll go in, tie him up, and put him aboard a ship bound for the end of the world." The young queen was pleased, but the armor-bearer, who was devoted to the hero, heard the whole conversation and told the little tailor all about the plot. "They won't get away with that," said the little tailor. That night he went to bed with his wife at the usual hour. When she thought he was asleep, she got up, opened the door, and lay down again. The little tailor, who was only pretending to be asleep, cried out with a loud voice, "Boy, hurry up with that jerkin you're making and get those breeches mended, or I'll break my yardstick over your head. I've done 7 with one blow, killed 2 giants, brought home a unicorn, and captured a wild boar. And now I'm expected to be afraid of these scoundrels at my door?" When they heard that, the servants were terrified. Not one of them dared lay hands on him, and they ran as if the hosts of hell had been chasing them. And so the little tailor went on being a king for the rest of his days. The end.